Okay, well, I'd like to say thank you all for coming tonight. We're very grateful that neither the U.S. women are playing soccer at this moment or there's any major sporting event conflicting with us tonight, so yay. Sorry about the Warriors, but, you know, there's next year. Anyway, you are here tonight at the second of 3 speaker series events. My name is Kendall Flint. I'm the Director of Communications and Strategic Planning for Regional Government Services. And we are here tonight and here in Healdsburg for the last several months and a couple more to go to help gather as much public input as possible to present to the City Council so that they can move forward effectively on their strategic planning effort, which will be taking place a little bit later this year. And the idea here is that we've done, after we just finished another one today, we've done a series of 14 focus groups with different members of the community representing different viewpoints. We've also had our first speaker series event, which was 2 weeks ago, on economic diversity. And this evening we're going to be talking a bit about land use and housing. And then we'll do a third event on Monday night, so I know you guys are going to come back for that, and that's going to be presented by the SSTAT, who worked really well over the last year and a half, developing some ideas on their own. So there's going to be an opportunity to find out what they learned and sort of what their findings came out to. We're going to be doing staff workshops in August, and then we're coming back here for a workshop, a public workshop. Joe, did we settle a date on that yet?
Public workshop?
Yeah. 22nd?
There'll be 2 public workshops, one at 6:30 on August 21st and one at 6:30 on August 22nd.
Thank you. So August 21st and August 22nd. We decided to go 2 nights because we wanted to maximize participation, and if you weren't able to go to one night, you can go to the other. The other thing that's really important on that is that entire workshop will be also available online, so if people weren't able to attend, they can absolutely go online and share their ideas with that. All of that information is then going to be presented to the City Council in September at the workshop on September 5th, and then that'll help them work on their strategic planning effort, which will take place in October. One thing we know about Healdsburg, it's a very diverse community. We've got a lot of beautiful homes. We've got folks that have been here for decades and some that are relatively new. One of the things that we've learned so far is people have some real concerns about connectivity, preserving that connectivity, preserving the small town charm that's here, making sure that the businesses and that the whole community are equally balanced with visitor serving uses as well as residential serving uses. There's a lot of love for a very vibrant downtown that people really like to go and spend time in. And we also have seen that there's, of course, an idea about what do people want to see in terms of future development. How will this particular community evolve as time goes on? Because we know that cities don't remain the same, cities change. So what most cities do in this particular process is what we're talking about tonight, is they will have a general plan. Now, Healdsburg's first general plan was adopted in 1963, and at that time it projected a population of about 15,000 by 2010. The last general plan update was completed pardon me, about 10 years ago with another update. And that particular plan is what is in force today. Now, the only element of this that has been changed is the housing element. I'm going to talk about that in just a moment. So what is a general plan? Basically, a general plan is a policy document that is adopted by a city that sets in place parameters for how it would like to grow. And that is everything from the density of development, the types of development, where development will take place, where we'll have parks preservation, all those different things. It sets a map, if you will, for land use moving forward. And within those goals and policies, the next thing that is usually developed on that is a zoning code. So it basically says, all right, if these are the goals, the policies, the things we want to do with our development, what do we need to put in place to make sure that we can achieve that? So one of the things that also comes out of that, this is something we kind of stole from our friends in Pasadena, but the general plan is the overarching document, and then underneath that are what we call specific plans. Some of you may be familiar with the Central Healdsburg Area Plan, others, but all these specific plans basically fit underneath the general plan and then are very specific to an area within the community. So we're going to talk a little bit about those in a moment as far as how those all connect together. So we have our general plan, with these various policies and elements that relate to circulation, land use, environmental impacts such as biology, light, noise, all kinds of things like that. Then we have our specific plans, and they become a little bit more, well, specific, talking about specific number of rooms, densities, heights, things like that. And then we have the zoning code, which of course implements all those things together. Now, over the last several years, I mentioned we have the central Healdsburg Avenue plan, which is basically called the CHAP, and that's centered in the downtown area. We've also seen the Mill District be developed, or at least a specific plan finished on that one. We have the North Entry Area Plan. And then coming up pretty soon here, we're going to have the South Entry Plan. And these 4 specific plans all fit underneath the general plan, although we've been hearing in these focus groups there might be some inconsistencies or things that we need to look at. That's one of the things we're talking about tonight. So when we look at the South Entry Plan, this is another opportunity the city might have for economic diversity, to have things that are more business-oriented, industrial uses, things like that, something that might be better suited to get in different types of jobs within the community. So on our other flip side here, beside we talk about business, housing is the thing that we've been hearing the most about. Housing and the types of housing and the access to housing. A number of folks have expressed to us that they have, family, kids, whatnot, that can't afford to buy a house here. There's some concerns about families being able to move here. And we basically have also an aging population. So we're seeing a greater number of older folks that have homes and less folks that are younger with kids and whatnot with that. These kind of look at the trends. Larry Mintier, wave Larry, I'm going to introduce you again in a second. Larry's firm completed the city's last housing element in 2015. And that basically takes a look at where you're going to have housing, what types of housing, and what percentage of affordable housing might be existing in the community. Now, I think most of the folks that we've talked to have also said that when it comes to affordable housing, it's kind of a misnomer in places like Healdsburg, because what would be affordable here would still require a very high income in order to get it. So one of the questions we've got to come up with, or answers I suppose, is how to address attainable housing. How do you make housing accessible to people within the community to keep them here? And we also have Larry Florin with Burbank Housing with us tonight, and I think he's going to be talking a bit about how you come up with these solutions to provide entry-level housing and housing for seniors and whatnot. So our panel tonight, we have Larry Mintier, who's a project advisor with Mintier Harnish. Larry, you've been in planning for at least 50 years, a very long time.
Maybe two dozen.
2 dozen?
Maybe 3 dozen.
There you go. Memory's the first thing to go, Larry. Maya DeRosa is, of course, the planning and building director here in the city of Healdsburg. And then I mentioned Larry Florin with Burbank Housing. And then Keith Woods is with us tonight. And Keith he's the chief executive officer for the North Coast Building Exchange. So when you look at this panel and you look at them going across, we basically have Larry talking about overall, he actually does this all over the world, overall impacts of general plans, what they mean, how they're used, how they can be applied, what are other means and mechanisms to getting what you want in your community. Maya, of course, has been very well versed on all these very specific plans and some of the very specific things that the city is trying to do in the here and now. And then, of course, Larry Florin works with Burbank Housing, which builds and creates affordable housing projects. And Keith here, who loves to applaud and promised me he was not going to throw anything to the crowd tonight, he's our builder. And so basically he's be able to look at the cost of building and how some of those things in this community can either hinder or help us get things built. So first question for our panel tonight, I'm going to start with Larry. You're going to have to share that microphone, Maya, so if you can pass that down to Larry so he has it. We're going to start with him, and then we're going to go down to Larry and back the other way. But Larry, when cities have general plans, why do they have them at all? Why have a general plan? And what impact does it really have on a city's ability to grow and to maintain the type of community character that they'd like to have?
Well, the facile answer is state law requires cities and counties to have general plans, but beyond that, there are really, really good reasons to prepare a general plan. And so often when people are talking about the general plan, they're just thinking about land use. But the general plan is much more than just a land use document. It's really an umbrella policy statement for cities and
I know you like to talk with your hands, Larry, but you got to keep the microphone closer to there. Yep.
got it.
Yep. Yep.
And I think there are three things that make general plans really important in communities. First, I mean, this concept that the general plan is an umbrella framework, policy framework for communities. But three features make it really important. The first is that the general plans address a broad range of topics. It's really very comprehensive and addresses more issues in a city than any other document, except perhaps the budget. More than the strategic plan, more than any other document, more than the zoning ordinance. So that's a very important mechanism for looking at various issues and making trade-offs. It's also the longest term document that cities and counties adopt. Typically, these plans are, when they're updated for a 20-year time horizon, which, you know, the strategic plan is being updated, a 5-year document, budgets, year, 2 years, depending on how that's structured. So the general plan tries to take a very long look into the future. And the third thing that's really important about the general plan is that it's legally binding. Virtually all decisions that the City of Healdsburg makes in terms of public projects and then private projects, those all have to be consistent with the general plan. So the general plan is really sort of a touchstone for the validity of all these actions related to open space, development, safety, you name it. There are all these requirements that require that you go back to the general plan and test the validity of that action against the plan. So again, I'm saying that this issue, the scope of the general plan goes well beyond land use. And in terms of community growth, I mean, while you're not obliged as a community to adopt some of the key policies that you have in your general plan, these are really a function of your particular philosophy and your concern about the future of the community, like the growth management ordinance or your urban boundaries restrictions. All of that is something that you determine yourself. So by that, you're determining in connection with the general plan, the rate of growth and the extent of growth. And of course, once you constrain those two or make decisions about those, then you have really important questions about what occurs within that framework. And again, as I was saying a minute ago, every decision you make relative to land use has got to be tested against the general plan.
I wonder if you could just briefly touch on also that when you look at the general plan, the component that goes along with it is an environmental review of what that type of development will mean in terms of air, biology, traffic, all these other things.
Anytime you do an update of your plan, assuming that it's pretty broad-based, you're going to have to do an environmental impact report, and I'm sure virtually all of you are familiar with EIRs, because they're required for most significant development projects. So if you adopt an area plan or a specific plan, that an EIR, or at least environmental review, is required. So in the process of preparing and adopting a general plan, you're going to take a look at a broad range of environmental issues and then identify, to the extent that there are significant adverse impacts, you're going to be obliged to come up with mitigation measures. In the case of the general plan, those will get turned into policies and programs for the future.
One other follow-up question before we go over to Maya on this one, but what's the shelf life of a general plan? And I would like to have you answer that kind of the context that we've worked on several of these together, that there are some jurisdictions out there that haven't touched their plans in 30 years. There are others that are constantly updating. What do you see as the average lifespan of a good general plan?
Well, first, there's no state law requirement for how often you update your plan, except in the case of the housing element. At one point years ago, a lot of planners were trying to make an argument that you needed to update your plan every 5 years. Well, that's a pretty big challenge. And so a lot of us have gotten to the point we're saying, well, someplace between 5 and 10 years is a good time frame for how often you need to update the plan. Now, you folks are halfway through the time frame for your 2009 general plan. The time horizon is 2030, so you're halfway there. And so there are lots of good reasons that I could cite for why it's important to update your plan at this point, but it largely has to do with what's changed in your community and how you see your needs in the future. So again, no specific requirement, but 5 to 10 years is a good sort of interval rule of thumb.
Okay, Maya, I want to ask you a question about this. So the city right now has a general plan in place. You've just gone through these other specific area plans, and we see some things in Healdsburg that frankly are unlikely to change. Some of the neighborhoods would likely stay the same. What do you see from the planning standpoint, or where are you at right now? What's working? Where are you having some challenges that you see from both the development applicant process and just in general?
Yeah, that's a great way to start when you think about where do we move forward. And probably most recently, I'm not sure, raise of hands, who participated in our design guidelines update? I know a few people did. I see a few familiar faces. So we actually did a lot of really great exercises through that document of taking a look at the city, where are areas that are pretty homogeneous, where we don't really see change, and where are the opportunities, and in those areas, how do we want to see the city change or grow from a design point of view? So is this a neighborhood that's keep it 1 story, 2 stories? So I know that's not really getting into the big policy things that a general plan does, but what it did raise awareness that we see, hey, along Kennedy Lane and the river there's a lot of underutilized land and a lot of great opportunity to capitalize on those great views of the river and redevelop there. What are the areas where we're probably not going to see a whole lot of change happen? I think a lot of you in the audience could probably answer that. Our most recent subdivisions that have been approved, where like Parkland Farms, the area and the Powell, that whole area that's R1 6000 zoned around Powell Street, our single-family neighborhoods. I mean, those are rock solid, and I think they're going to continue going strong. And we might get small additions there, but I do see, even though we're a small city, we do have some fantastic opportunity areas as the general plan speaks to those actually in the policies, such as the South Entry. A reason why there has not been a lot of change in that area over time is because it's very constrained from an infrastructure point of view, and I know Director Zimmer's in the room here and can speak to that. So, it's frustrating, honestly, for some developers that say, well, this is a great opportunity to bring forward housing or mixed use because we actually have one parcel that's already zoned for that in the South Entry. They can't do that right now until we finish the planning process and a plan on how to get the infrastructure there to serve that development. The North Entry, we just finished that planning process, so there's an area where we're going to be seeing a new neighborhood come online that's really exciting. In the next 5 years, hopefully no more than 10. The Healdsburg Avenue corridor, there's a complete streets program going on there right now to help increase connectivity and mobility. There's been talk about our downtown and how do we extend the downtown north of Piper Street? It seems people walk the plaza and they do that familiar circle, right? And how do we really redevelop a lot of those parcels that are a hybrid of homes and commercial uses on very deep setbacks, where we could actually be doing more of what we call a form-based code, where you actually, really bring a true urban frontage and continue that along Healdsburg Avenue, and that would also increase housing opportunities. So we've got auto dealerships. So the general plan allows us to really take a look at what are the uses that are, good for this community and should continue, and where are there opportunity areas where the land has become valuable. And when we weigh the balance of, wow, we really need to bring on housing, where are those opportunity areas where it's walkable to city services and transit and all those good things that we talk about.
Okay, great. Can you pass down to Larry Florin? And Larry, just to briefly, obviously the housing element affects the work that you do pretty specifically, because it identifies places where affordable housing and other things could go. What do you see is good about this general plan, or what kind of issues do you have, if any, that affect your ability to deliver affordable housing projects?
Well, first, actually, I have to take some offense to your opening where you declared that Keith was a builder and that I wasn't. We actually,
My bad.
Okay,
My bad.
So I'm actually,
My bad.
We actually, Burbank that's our business, is we build affordable housing mostly from the ground up. I'm just kidding you. I haven't honestly spent a lot of time looking at the general plans. We work in a lot of different communities, but I will tell you in general what housing elements have done. Quite frankly, besides identifying places that you can build housing, is to put some pressure on local communities to try to meet some goals that were not otherwise being met. And the reason why the whole housing element legislation came about was because there was a number of communities around the country that were sort of thumbing their nose at affordable housing and saying that they didn't want to have any in their community. And so the housing element became a tool that has been used to measure success, how you're meeting on your goals, especially on housing your workforce. And I understand Healdsburg's actually doing pretty well in the housing element. I haven't followed it quickly, but some of you may be following that the new administration, the Newsom administration, has started bringing actions against some of the more egregious communities that have made a point of not meeting their housing goals, and for fact, a few that have never done housing elements. And so it really was intended, besides as a land use tool, to become a public policy tool that is intended to have each of the communities take responsibility for providing a broad range of housing options in their community, from very low income up to traditional market rate housing.
We're going to get in a second to the difference, because the housing element itself basically identifies land that says this is where this will go, but it doesn't necessarily build it. And that's why companies like yours are very important. And we're going to talk a minute, coming back to that, about how you get that built. What are the incentives that can make that work? Keith, I'm curious from your perspective as a builder, or builders you represent, how do the builders community look at general plans in general, and when do they want to get an amendment? When do they want to see a change? How important is that document to attract good building into the community?
Yeah, Kendall, thank you to you and Joe and others for inviting me. Let me give the 30 seconds of who I represent. North Coast Builders Exchange is really a contractors association. We have 1,250 members in Sonoma, Lake, Mendocino, and Napa primarily. That's our market area. 850 of them are licensed contractors. They are general and subcontractors, and the rest are architects, engineers, suppliers, Burbank housing, banks, etc. So we try to represent the construction industry and just provide services to them. I'm going to tell you that very few of them, meaning builders, home builders, contractors, commercial and residential, they don't really look at general plans probably as much as they should. They rely on me as CEO and others to be aware of a general plan, but the philosophy for most of the members that I work for in the four-county area are, you decide what you want to build and where, and then we'll build it for you. and they're not really developers for the most part. They're not in the direct day-to-day politics of it, though we're active in candidates and issues, but that's not their main concern. I'm glad, frankly. I have such mixed feelings about general plans. My background for 30 years was in Chamber of Commerce work. I was CEO of the Santa Rosa Chamber, and then I got recruited in 2000 to come to work for the Builders Exchange. And I've watched general plans in cities I worked in, San Francisco, San Antonio, Santa Rosa, and and looking at the county and the 15 cities we represent, good for general plans. It's a process that's required, and it's healthy for a community to do this. But man, do I wish it were renamed a general vision, because I think a community can try to take a look at what it thinks it wants to be, what it wants to become when it grows up. But I don't know how many of you could have projected fairly accurately what your life would look like today back in 2009. So it's a must. You've got to have it. But I've learned to take them with a bit of a grain of salt, because the dynamics of recessions and people's wants, needs, and desires for housing and business and schools and population, it all changes so dramatically. That's a roundabout way of saying we're not directly involved in it. I appreciate them. We'll take part in the housing element of a general plan, which is a requirement, as I think most of us know. We'll be real interested in that, because clearly everywhere from Healdsburg to Santa Rosa, where I live, and the four-county area are at a bit of a crossroads when it comes to deciding what it wants to do about housing. Now, crossroads is a speaker's trick of saying, I don't know what's going to happen. We're at a crossroads, and then we'll figure out, and then I'm covered for any predictions. But that's my we're not directly involved in it, but we know we are affected by decisions that are made.
Okay. Larry, I'm going to come back to you. One of the things that we've heard about in the downtown area and others is sort of the types of uses that are there. And I think Maya actually brought it up tangentially. A form-based code, some people have talked about that. What does that mean? What kind of a tool is it? And are there other tools, aside from a general plan, that the cities can use to guide or amend their development to get to something that they want?
Sure. This notion of form-based codes has been around for, I don't know, about 15 years in the local government development planning business, and it seems like it's been kind of sold as the answer to every problem. Remember that adage of, for a hammer, every problem looks like a nail. And so a lot of people have gone to those codes, or these urban form codes basically, and said that is liberating for us to be able to work with those codes. Essentially, it elevates the three dimensions and character of buildings up, perhaps not over the two-dimensional uses prescription of a zoning ordinance, but it does give more importance to thinking about what the development looks like and how it works relative to the streetscape, where zoning, the traditional zoning, is really two-dimensional. It's sort of like adding another dimension or adding more color to the zoning ordinance. And so it's a very useful tool. It's important to, I think in those terms, but I've always thought that form-based codes were specific plans meet design guidelines. And so, if you're working on an area plan or a specific plan and you have good design guidelines or develop those along with the area plan or specific plan, you really pretty much get to what form-based codes would give you in the end. And it takes a lot of time, a lot of energy, and often lots of money to convert to a form-based code. So you have to be careful about heading down that path. I'm not saying it's not a useful exercise, but more than one community we've worked in said, yeah, that's what we want to do, and gotten into it and said, this is, we just bit off more than we can chew, so we're gonna do something that's sort of a modification of that concept.
So I want to ask Maya a follow-up on that too, because I think, at least for the city of Healdsburg, from what we've heard from the folks we've been speaking with, that might be something that works in like the downtown area, but maybe isn't as applicable elsewhere. What kind of things have you thought about as it relates to that, and other tools that you've been looking at in terms of tweaks that might be able to get what folks are wanting to get out of their zoning?
Thank you. So it was interesting to hear through the SSTAT process. I think it was a year ago in August when they had the let's come together and get all the input on what came the community consensus. And the idea of a master plan for the entire city, I don't know if that's the right fit, but clearly in the context of the downtown, I think we can all relate to Mitchell Center and also where Shelton's is. It's unusual to have such amount of parking in a very thriving downtown, and with the value of the land and talking about how can we grow and add housing, that's a ripe example of where a form-based code would be great, and to actually be more prescriptive, because what it would do is it would take that whole block and it would give certainty to the developer on, do you want, where, how high, and as Larry did an excellent job describing the volume, and okay, so you really want me to bring that to the edge. And it's not so much related to land use. I mean, let the whole tenet of a form-based code is let the market drive what the use is, but let's make sure that what gets built really is the form of what the community is looking for, and a continuation of what we want to see in terms of scale. And and the downtown is the perfect place where it makes sense to really drive that infill. So it provides more clarity for developers on what the city is looking for in terms of the urban form, and it's been celebrated by many builders because, okay, this is, just tell me what you're looking for, staff, in terms of a development, so they can, hopefully have a more streamlined process. So I think in those areas where, gosh, we know that we need to do something more there, but what is it going to look like? And the design guidelines are not clear enough in terms of what that form would look like. It's definitely a great tool. The other thing I would add is, the Mill District is an excellent example of how an area plan has brought in development according to the city's vision for that entrance to the downtown. And I think I know if we had not gone through that planning process in 2014 to adopt that plan and had laid out a really clear vision for a future investor of how we want that whole area to come together and have a unique mix of housing and commercial development, and really truly bring energy to along that frontage that really doesn't have identity. It's delivered that, and it gives, again, clarity to a developer to say, that's what you're looking for? Wow, you got design guidelines, urban frontage, this is the land use mix, and it really helps, be catalytic in terms of helping the city meet its redevelopment goals, and also housing and other goals as well.
Okay, great. Keith, I want to start with you on the cost of building, and we're going to also send this down to Larry Florin afterwards. I mean, how does the cost of building affect the delivery of homes, whether those are market rate or affordable homes, and new businesses? What type of challenges does that present for the building community at this point?
I'm going to defer to my friend Larry Florin. Anything Larry says that's different to what I say, go with him. He knows more of what he's talking about. But I can tell you what I hear, up to and including almost every day as we deal with fire victims. We've been working extensively with the 5,000 plus people that lost homes tragically in Sonoma County. I've learned a lot about the cost of building. It's gone up. But what one builder said to me, I'll never forget, that every builder gets a question from somebody who wants to build a home, whether it's a rebuild or a brand new home. What's it going to cost me per square foot? They get it every single time. One guy that I admire had a great answer. I won't say who it was, but it was Keith Christofferson. And when Keith gets the question, how much is it going to cost me to rebuild my Fountain Grove home? Keith says, okay, I want to buy a car. What's it going to cost me for a car? and it just sets you back. Well, do you want a Ford Focus, you want a Mercedes or Lamborghini? I mean, the prices for building right now for a home, production homes in Coffee Park area and other parts of the county for a rebuild, and by the way, only 2-3% of people are rebuilding the homes they lost. It's too expensive to rebuild the home you lost. They're building new homes, production homes. What they're finding is at the low end, $200 to $225 a square foot is a bargain. In Coffee Park, the production homes where you pick a model as if it were a development, it's going to be around $250 a square foot. You get into areas that are not yet up in the hillside, but in between $300 to $350. The Fountain Grove couples have come in and told me they've been quoted on average $400 to $500 a square foot for a new home, and up to $800 to $1,000 square feet, depending on how fancy you want to get. This talk about codes fascinates me because one of at least state codes that have been that I don't argue with them, energy efficiency, safety, all these great things come with a price tag. And it's the consumer ultimately who's paying that price tag. One builder who had built a home in Coffee Park in 1986 hauled out his old plans from 86 when he built it, dusted them off, and calculated, took a little while, calculated from what the building codes were in 86 to what they are today. The additional cost of codes that need to be applied was $102,000. So if he built it for $150,000 20 years ago or more, it's now $102,000 more. So the cost of how to build, boy, if it's high density, if it's condos versus single family, slope lots, Kendall, there's almost no fixed figure that can be given. I'll just add for your information, in Santa Rosa, Coffee Park is going gangbusters. They've got 80% of the people lost homes. They've got them underway. They are 6,000 square foot flat lots. Give me some of those for building because there's not too much of a problem. You get into a half acre or more and a slope lot up in Fountain Grove or elsewhere, boy, the foundation work and retaining walls and all make it nearly impossible to keep it affordable in today's world. So that's a long way of saying there's no set answer, but I can give you ballpark ranges that I defer though to Larry.
Well, I'm going to have you pass down to Larry because, I mean, knowing that with the expense going up, and I think to a person in this room, everybody's interested in how you can deliver affordable housing. What are some of the creative strategies for being able to build, not just have it zoned for housing, but to be able to build it? How are you making it work?
Well, I was going to ask you a question. What is affordable housing?
Well, we were talking about attainable housing. Oh, who's trying to break into my computer?
You've been hacked.
Well, here in this area, as an example, the cost of a home is so high that it's very difficult for people that work in the hospitality industry, as an example, to purchase a home, or a teacher, or a nurse. So when you are constructing your projects, how are you funding those? Where are you finding the dollars to make that work?
Yeah, so in our industry, which is different than the traditional market rate industry, we go where the money is. First, I would be I have to acknowledge Healdsburg. Recently, we've spent a lot of time up here because you've taken a very aggressive stand in preserving housing that is what we call affordable by design, or naturally occurring affordable housing. No, there's actually a term for it, believe it or not. So you've been very aggressive in preserving and going after and preserving your housing stock. And some of you know we just closed with the city's help. Stephen Sotomayor is here, and with his help and David McElalian and the councils on a 32-unit project here in Montevina, which was fabulous because it's one real sustainable way to preserve that which is affordable in your community. And it is a heck of a lot cheaper on a per unit basis than it is to build a brand new. It doesn't deal with the fact that you have a lack of housing. I mean, it's still the issue of the fact that you're not alone. It's not Healdsburg isn't an outlier. The entire state of California right now is 3.5 million homes in the deficit. Sonoma County is like 30,000 homes is necessary to bring Sonoma County up to meet the demands that's there right now, and you get a couple of hundred homes built a year. So we're so far off, it's not even close to attainable. So you're going to have to look at a lot of different strategies, but that's not the question you asked me. The question you asked me was about how do we afford to build affordable housing? Well, affordable housing by definition, and it's an art. It's a term that's used and it's misused a lot. But in general, I'm going to use it to mean subsidized housing that has some form of government subsidy that brings down either the cost of renting or the cost of ownership. And we actually build both for sale, subsidized affordable housing, and we have multifamily rental housing. We do both. And Burbank's built about 5,000 units in Sonoma County since we've been around. We look to where the communities that offer funding and the funding sources, and that's where we go to build, be quite honest with you. We're the communities that have the resources to be able to support the types of subsidies that are necessary. And I'll just speak in whole numbers here because I'm sort of a simple person like that. So it costs me on a multifamily project, which is, think of it as an apartment building. Generally, it costs me about $450,000 to $500,000 per unit to build a single one of those units. On a per square foot basis, the cost of construction varies all over the map. Keith hit the nail on the head. It depends upon what you're building. But there are so many other costs that are associated. Impact fees that are layered on a project. Most communities, it's about $40,000 to $60,000 per unit of impact fees that you pay. The code issues, as Keith mentioned, of course, land. Everybody thinks they're going to, inherit a piece of land and sell it and become rich. That's just the California dream, I guess. So it's really expensive. $450,000 to $500,000 on multifamily. We are building for sale. This is a basic subsidized 1,300 square foot unit. We have about 100. We have in two projects. We have about 100 of these units under construction. These are single family. They call them duet style homes that are basic starter homes. There is as basic as 3 bedrooms, 1,300 square feet, two bedrooms. They're costing us now about $480,000 a piece to build. And so we're nonprofit. So by definition, we don't take any profit. We actually get subsidies to write down the costs of those to the people we're selling them to. So we're selling those 400, this is a hard one for anybody to understand, but we're selling those homes that cost us $480,000 a piece to build for anywhere from $290,000 to $390,000, because that's the income levels that we're mandated to try to reach are in that range. If you think about that, if someone and that's people that make 80% area median income, that's what's defined as a low income person. Someone who makes, and by the way, low income is teachers, they're your firefighters, maybe not firefighters because they tend to make a lot of money, but they're a lot of your public safety people. A lot of the infrastructure of your community now in Healdsburg and in most of coastal California is what you classify as low income. They're 80% AMI and below. So it's not the other guy, it's the person you see every day on the street. Those folks can't afford to buy a home in their community. They're ranging about, just on a cost basis, even if a builder was to sell it for no profit, which no one's going to do, they'd be $100,000 underwater based on the mortgages that they could get to buy that home. It just gives you an example of just how out of reach home ownership is, and rental. I'm not going to get into that now, but rental is just as bad right now.
Okay, what I'd like to do, I want to ask you one brief question, then I'm going to open it up for everybody else. But in your experience, what are some of the creative ways you've seen communities fund projects like yours?
Oh, well, creative ways. First, the most important thing I think for any builder coming into a community is to have certainty in that when they start the process, they know what's going to come out the other end, and they know how long it's going to take. I think people always focus on the fact that, we want to build, this form-based code or whatever you need to build certainty into the process. Time is money when you're a builder. Not necessarily for us because we have a different economic model, but if you're a market rate developer, and I was at one point in my life, you generally have borrowed money, or there's equity, or there's sources. It accumulates. So time is really important, and knowing what you can build going into the process. To the extent that you can get by right housing here, which is a new term that everybody loves, but it's so critically important if you really want to get housing built in your community. Someone can walk in and get a plan stamped over the counter. Incredibly important. I've yet to go through a planning process. So we build is always the highest priority for the community. Everybody wants to get it built. We're all behind it. We really want to say get built. Right now, as I was telling folks, after the fires, we had a project started in Southwest Santa Rosa, 48 units of affordable home ownership project. Before the fires, we were told by the planning department it's going to take 14 months to get it approved. Fires happen, everybody wants to see it get built, it's really important. After the fires, it's 15 months to get it approved. So it's certainty in time and certainty in the process is so important to builders to get things built.
Absolutely.
Boy, you ask about if you want to know what drives up the cost of housing, Larry just nailed it. It's the lack of predictability and consistency in getting a permit. Sonoma County had a reputation from my Chamber of Commerce days, and even now as being the Bermuda Triangle of development and housing, where good ideas and developments would go in and start and never be seen again. And we're trying to turn that around. And you're right, in Santa Rosa, you can, if you've lost your home in a fire, there at around I meet with the building officials and builders every month, around 12 to 15 days you can get your permit and get started. If you're in a non-fire zone, 6, 8, 9 months or so if things go well. I'm just anxious to do a program for local government, the staff and council called the cost of delay, because I don't think people understand what happens when you make somebody with a project and who has a construction loan and has paid all these fees and they have no income for it for a year or two or more. It just kills it off. And the only grenade I'll lob into the meeting here, Kendall, is that I'm sorry, there is no such thing as affordable housing in Sonoma County. Who are we kidding? We have subsidized housing, and the only issue is who's going to do the subsidizing and how. That's what the discussion is. The only affordable housing is for a 22-year-old still living at home. They've got affordable housing, but everyone else, no, it's going to be market-driven, and it needs to be subsidized if it's not market-driven. That's just reality for the 9 cities in the county of Sonoma.
Well taken. I do want to open this up for questions so that if folks have something they'd like to bring up to ask our panel and bring it on the table. Anybody have a question for our group? Yes, Jim.
Thank you. Good evening. Thank you so much for being here. The information is just fantastic. I have a question.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, I forgot.
My name is Jim Winston, Healdsburg. And this question would be for Larry Florin, please. Larry, according to Burbank Housing, according to HUD, Housing and Urban Development, is 120 to 160 AMI considered missing middle or market rate housing according to HUD?
I said I wouldn't address this point. So the definitions are clear as far as, and what happens and what it's referring to is the fact that the Department of Housing and Urban Development set standards 80% income is 80% below is considered low income, and then 60% is very low income, and they publish the data that shows what the income is based on this census and how much a family can afford to pay for housing in that jurisdiction. So everything above 80% has always been kind of a mishmash as far as housing is concerned. There haven't been any programs really up until very recently to subsidize housing above 80% AMI, or at least in the most recent past. The current administration has been focusing on a focus on 80 to 120%, and they use the term workforce housing to define 80 to 120% AMI. In general, that's what I've come to expect as Workforce housing, it doesn't really mean anything. It only means something when it comes attached with some form of subsidy. But basically what they're saying is there's now the term is the missing middle, workforce housing. It's got a lot of different names that folks are looking at. These are the people that the market has left behind. The market is not meeting the demand for that 80 to 120%. So where traditionally, as Keith was right, subsidized affordable housing has to be subsidized. Traditionally, that was 80% AMI and below. Historically, low-income people that couldn't make it on their own. That's now extended up to 80 to 120% AMI in communities like this that need subsidies in order to have housing built to meet the demand of that part of the population.
So would you then consider that anything over 120% of AMI would be market rate housing?
You know, you start to come up against some real barriers. So we actually had a real-time experience with this. We were managing a project that was built that was called affordable housing. It was a requirement as part of a hotel that was built. I think it was Seaview was the developer of the project, and we were asked to come in, Burbank, and manage. It was a little unusual for us, and ultimately it wasn't the right fit for us. But this was housing that went up to 120% AMI. So it's not, just bear with me a second, it's not quite what you're asking, but it's close. We were marketing housing for folks at 120% AMI. Everything that we manage, we have compliance rules that you have to do income verifications. Every year you have to come in and verify that you still have the same income. Only a certain number of people can live in the house, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a requirement when you live in a Burbank housing that you have to fulfill certain legally mandated requirements. When we were marketing the homes at 120%, we were having folks walk in the door who wanted to rent those homes, and they were saying they didn't want to go through the compliance process because they could go across the street or down the block or wherever it was and find comparable housing within $100 or so a month range that didn't come with those compliance. So it sort of was an experiment that showed that the market on the rental market at that point in Healdsburg was probably a little over 120% AMI. I don't know if that answered your question, but it's probably in the 130 to 140% AMI range right now as far as some of the older stock is concerned.
Oh, we have a question back here.
Gail Jonas, and I have a threshold question, and the answer to that, then I will either quote from what I understand is a current housing needs assessment, or I will leave those comments out because it's been updated. So my question to you is the housing needs assessment dated October 2015, has that been officially updated? This is Healdsburg's housing need assessment.
I might have Stephen respond to that. That we have our housing department that is working. So planning is, we do an annual report regarding the regional housing needs, which we have to prepare and submit to HCD. I think what you're talking to may also be part of what the CHC has been working on in that work plan.
So my question is, if I rely on that because I don't see anything more recent, I just wanted to point out some of the comments in that housing needs assessment that I am relying on because I haven't seen anything more current. And it drives my concern that we really don't appear to need any more market rate housing. And this is directly from our housing needs assessment. Also, I'm very concerned about climate change, and the housing needs assessment states that 33% of the Healdsburg jobs are filled by residents, and the goal here is not apparently, according to a chart, to go more than 50%. So if climate change is really an existential threat, as we're being told, I'm wondering why we as a community wouldn't strive to have more of the people who work here, live here, and get out of their cars. So that's one issue. The second issue is that 79%, this is 2015 that I'm relying on, of all our housing units are single-family residences. And the same report goes on and says that they are unaffordable to 70 to 80% of city households. So if that's the case, if we're going to be building houses for our residents rather than new people coming in, it would appear that market rate housing is not what's needed here. And the final thing I'd like to say is that according to the housing needs assessment, 80% of the households who have a person in the hotel, retail, restaurant earn less than $40,000 a year. And how do we address that as we increase tourism? How do we address those housing needs? And I will also point out, and I was opposed to of ending the growth management ordinance because I saw it as a trigger to more market rate housing, that it now, there's an exemption now of 50 to 150 multifamily residences. They're in the 120 to 160% AMI, and here in Healdsburg, we call affordable what is not is exempt from the GMO. The GMO does not affect affordable housing. And with the new AMI that's just come out, those are families. Yes, yes, I am. That's all. No, that's all. So this is from the income that is now exempt from any restraints of the GMO is from $111,960 for a family of 4 to $149,280. So to conclude this with a question, what I'm trying to get is, where is the emphasis here? Is it on more market rate housing? Is it on more affordable? Where are we going as a community? Thank you.
I'll start, and if anyone wants to add in to the multi-pronged question, thank you, Gail. So the last speaker series we had, the question came up of like, what was the number one issue facing Healdsburg, and the city manager, clearly articulated that workforce housing. And from the advanced planning side that I sit on, I think it's not just in Healdsburg. I think it's all over the state. I mean, our focus is, when I started my planning career, there was always a focus on what can we do to really, as planners, help balance what we call the job housing balance. So I come from Orange County, where it's very rich of jobs in the Orange County, and people are commuting and creating long vehicle miles traveled and greenhouse from Riverside County. So what can communities and jurisdictions do to do that? And this is still 20 years fast forward. It's still a very relevant and big concern. So I think, in the spirit of what we're talking about here tonight, the general plan and the housing element together are the opportunities to really make sure that, first of all, our land uses, when we're building land uses and density, are we putting these new communities close to infrastructure, connectivity, transit, so we don't have to continue to be car dependent? What are we doing to close the gap on making, in our particular community, workforce housing more available? I know in our most recent conversations with Comstock, the city's really taking a harder stance at making sure that at least developers start mitigating for their commercial development, their housing impacts, especially as it relates to low-wage workers. We have not yet, done a commercial inclusionary ordinance, but that is something that I know that we are talking about exploring with the council this year to help commercial projects at least provide either funding or build on site the housing for the impact of their project. So I think it's, it is definitely, it's not just local to here to Healdsburg. These are issues that Sonoma County is struggling with, statewide is struggling with, and I think your comments are well taken and heard. I don't know if anyone else wants to jump in on that.
May I, Kendall?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, Gail, if I understood your question ultimately was market rate or affordable, what are we trying to do? I can tell you that in going to dozens, if not hundreds of meetings, what I've concluded is our county, well, one, the Bay Area was labeled the world's largest gated community. Our 9 counties, and I'm frightened that that's probably accurate description today. But after all these meetings, what I've concluded is everything's got to be on the table. Every form of housing has got to be evaluated. ADUs, accessory dwelling units, lofts, multifamily, condos, apartments, townhouses. We've got market rate houses, single family. We need to have everything on the table as possibilities, because there are some that are going to be more affordable than others, but there's still going to be a demand for market rate housing. There are people that don't want multifamily, and I guess it's got to be a community decision decision that never mind what you want, this is what we're going to offer. That's up to each of the communities to decide. But I know that we can't, in my view, we can't close the door on any form of housing to be considered. What may work in Sonoma may not work in Healdsburg or Sebastopol, and a community's got to make its own decision. I do worry about the jobs housing imbalance. That's the issue, not just du jour, but of this decade and the next. And one community, I was at a meeting today with some Sacramento housing experts talking about state legislation and what's happening locally. There's one community down in the peninsula where 2 council members had proposed an ordinance of no more jobs to be created in our community. That's their answer to the housing problem, is no more jobs. Well, that one isn't necessarily a solution. It's an approach that probably needs to be put back into the oven. But my bottom line, everything that we've never looked at before as housing has got to be a possibility, because the market is changing. The 20 to 30-year-old may not want what the 50 to 60-year-old wants in terms of housing or shelter. So we've got to look at everything. Maybe Healdsburg doesn't want to, but most of the rest of the communities are trying to look at a menu of housing options and finding a good balance.
Okay, we've got a question back here.
I work in the land of the 30% AMI and lower. I'm the executive director for homeless services, and obviously we're not the most attractive people that anyone wants housed. But they're one of the most expensive people to keep unhoused in this population. So I'm just curious, what kind of incentives do you have to try and include the range of the 30% AMI and lower in what you're developing and what you're building? And if there is no incentive, how do we get that placed so that we can get some of the housing? Because our clients obviously are the most challenged to try and find housing for. And it seems to be an ongoing issue that it's not welcome and not encouraged in plans. So I just wanted to find out, is there ways around that, and what are they?
Larry, you want us to take that one? Yeah.
Yeah, so not an easy answer. The 30% and below are generally folks that are on some type of fixed income of some form, Social Security or the like. They're often referred to, they're often the homeless population of their community. And Burbank provides a range of affordable housing. The most difficult for us is the 30% and below by far, because it requires the highest subsidy on a per unit basis. So there's no market rate ability to be able to meet the demands of the 30% and below. You'd be underwater economically, and it's not even close. So you'd have to have some form of subsidy. The programs that look to try to, without subsidy, create affordable housing are the community's inclusionary housing requirements. So for instance, you would require that rather than pay a mitigation fee or into a fund, if a project is developing a certain number of units, that they be required to build, not just fund, but actually build a certain number of affordable units. The best that you will be able to do economically in that equation will be 50 to 60%. You might be able to get 30 and above. You'll never get to 30 and below. The economics just don't work in any community. So they have to, the population you're talking about is absolutely going to require a subsidy. Actually, we just got some exciting news today that I'll share with you. We actually were funded under a new state program called No Place Like Home, which is intended exactly for that population, for a project in Santa Rosa, where we're going to be building for 136 units of folks who are, in fact, formerly homeless. And we received $12 million from the state to help us to kickstart that project. So, but that's the type of subsidy we need on a per unit basis. That project is actually requiring about $300,000 per unit in subsidy, because it's not just the cost of construction, it's also the operating subsidy we need. So really difficult, and you can't do it without a public subsidy. But I would encourage you to consider the inclusionary housing requirements as part of your, and not, I mean, it's up to you. Obviously, this is a policy decision. But in my world, that means 80% AMI and below as a requirement to meet your inclusionary housing needs. You can do it, by the way. Though every developer in the world is well trained at telling you all the ways and reasons they can't do it. But I'll tell you, factually, having been on the other side of the table, you can do it. You need to be able to get the type number of units, and you need to be able to get the concessions from the municipality to be able to do it. But they can build inclusionary units. You just have to set the number at the right so that it economically makes sense. But that's the way to do it, really.
Okay. Other questions? Anybody? Yes. Here we go.
My name is Malamano. I live in Healdsburg, and I have a question about the projects that will attract developers, the project levels. And this, at the moment, my question excludes subsidies because that's a different kettle of fish. And I know we're doing some worthwhile things in that area, thank goodness. But my question is to Keith Woods. We now have a cap of 30 units on market rate housing, and our council just raised the required affordable segment of that, the other piece of it, from 15% to...
I'm having trouble hearing. Can you pull the mic just a tiny bit away?
Okay.
Just a little, yeah. Maybe it's just me.
Is there a volume control on this?
I think you're good.
Okay. So we have a cap right now due to our GMO of 30 units, and our council just raised the percentage of affordable units to be built when you get a permit for a developer to build 30 units. They raised it from 15 to 20%. So that's a total of 36 units, combination of market rate and affordables. A few years ago when we were talking about Measure R, there was a group of developers up there, and they were asked the same question. What's the minimum number of units that a developer will consider investing in? Is it above the 32 units? Is it below? They have the option of building elsewhere where there are no caps. So my question is, what is the minimum investment or minimum size of project that they would be willing to develop?
I'm not going to be able to help you. Yeah, I think you're looking for almost a one-size-fits-all answer. And if you're talking about Healdsburg versus other communities, I don't know that I can give you an answer. I'd defer to Larry.
This is actually the percentage of inclusionary housing. Sorry, the percentage of inclusionary housing is one that's debated across virtually every jurisdiction. San Francisco went up to one point to 25%, and every developer said, done, we're out, we can't afford to do it anymore. So there is, I mean, I really have to do economic studies to look at what are the real costs, what the development community can afford to provide in regards to inclusionary housing, and then you have to decide what AMI levels that you want, and that will be required. So I don't know if it's part of the general plan update or if it's going to be part of the housing element, but you can do an economic study to identify what a realistic number is to require at certain levels, and you generally have to change, if it's 10 units, 20 units, 30 units, it has to be different levels because you have to be able to amortize that cost over the entire project. But there are economic studies you can do to determine what is the right cost for your community, and there is a right number that will not scare. I couldn't tell you what it is in Healdsburg.
Well, don't the developers have an opportunity to pick an area where they're going to get an expected return on their investment?
Absolutely. They won't, I mean, the best way to determine whether a program works or not is to see whether it gets utilized. And they won't come and build if they can't get a return. The market is like that.
That's the point of my question, is there a level for that? We were told 75 to 100 units a few years ago when Measure R was on the ballot.
Okay, other questions? Anybody? I'm looking back at the guys. You guys have anything tonight? No? Okay. Any other questions for anybody here tonight? Okay, yep, here we go. One more. You're very welcome.
Hi, my name is Warren Watkins. I'm just a local citizen here.
It's on, just closer to your mouth.
It's on? Oh, closer?
Right in the mic.
Further away, closer. Anyway, I wish the city or the county or someone would try to tie together the cost of housing and the tourism industry. I don't think it's an accident that the city of Healdsburg and the city of Sonoma have the highest priced housing and the most tourism. The first slide that was put up here showed that the population, permanent population of Healdsburg was 15,000 people. I would say the population is up to 20 or 25,000 at certain times of the year because of the tourism here. And we never see anything about the impacts, or not much, on housing from this source of secondary housing. So the usual thing that I've seen here is people come up to visit Healdsburg, they stay in a hotel, they walk around town, they look at all the real estate signs, and we have tons of realtors around the plaza put their pictures up there. They buy a house, we lose another workforce family. The workforce family, the young kids cannot compete with the tourists coming in here because of the prices that they can pay a much higher amount. So my question would be, is there a way to tie together the price of housing we have in this town to the apparently unlimited tourism competition? Thank you.
Interesting thought. This actually came up in one of our focus groups
I just wanted to
today.
give you an example that it's not quite the answer to your question, but just your neighboring county across the east, Napa County last year voted on the November ballot, 5 jurisdictions and the county independently each voted to increase their tourism, their TOT, their tourism occupancy tax by 1% and to dedicate that 1% to subsidize affordable housing because of this very issue. And they won, they needed 2/3 votes on each jurisdiction and they received them in all but one. So that's just, it's not answering your question, but it is one policy that's been done.
And that's so interesting. That came up in one of our focus groups today that was very clear on that. We've got one more question back here.
Thank you. Tim Unger, Healdsburg. This is a comment and not a question, actually. I was heartened, particularly in light of the fact that when the SDAT report, the Sustainable Design Assessment Team report, was delivered by the AIA last August, Ed Starkey, the housing expert, talked about the value of form-based code. And I was heartened by Larry Florin's comments and Maya's comments about how much this makes sense, particularly because it builds certainty for the developer and it accelerates the pace at which approvals can be given to get building underway. And I see Larry shaking his head. I'm also heartened to see the good turnout here from the SDAT representation, which is 9 folks out of the people in attendance who are not staff or the press, which represents 41% of the audience. So thanks for being here.
I echo that. Thanks for being here. What I'd like to do here, we've got just a few more minutes left. I'd like to walk you through some fun things with your clickers. Does everybody have their clickers? Okay. Larry, you've seen this show before. Did you have something you want to add? Yeah.
Relative to form-based codes, I wanted to underscore something that Maya said, and that's that there are areas, limited areas within Healdsburg that are probably would benefit from form-based codes. When I was talking about some of the problems that I've seen with form-based codes, it's when a community tried to do the entire, apply it, overlay it on the entire community, and they just got overwhelmed. But if you have target areas, focus areas, doing form-based codes really can work, and it's more sort of the mental process and thinking in 3 dimensions and thinking in full colors that's so important when you're doing, let's say, working on a downtown area.
Thank you. I think well stated. Okay, so we all have these little click polling things. This is just a snapshot of the audience tonight, right? This is not like we're taking a vote and it's the end-all be-all of all things, but it's just sort of getting a sense of what the group think is here tonight. So when we look at this very first question here, how would you rank the overall quality of life here in Healdsburg? 1, and you see on your keypad, you've got little numbers, right? 1, excellent, 2, good, 3, average, 4, fair, you've got to be kidding, and 5, poor. So how would you rate the overall quality of life here in Healdsburg? And no matter how many times you push the button, it only registers once, just to let you know. Okay, well, let's just see what everybody says tonight. So how would you rank the quality of life? Excellent, good, average, average. So we've got some work to do. Okay, let's look at this next question. And this time you get to click 2 things, but wait before you click. What are your 2 biggest concerns for Healdsburg's future? 1, economic reliance on tourism. 2, lack of demographic diversity. That means age as well as race as well as socioeconomic. It is a demographic diversity. 3, housing affordability. 4, parking availability. 5, public safety. 6, overdevelopment, or 7, other. So just pick 2 of those and lock those in. You don't get one. Sorry, I'll let you play afterwards, okay? Okay, survey says, I love saying that. Okay, we don't have any other, but overdevelopment, certainly economic reliance on tourism, housing affordability. I will tell you in the 15 focus groups we were working on, those are the top 2, without a doubt. It's the top 2 across every single group. The question about how do we deliver economic diversity, how do we get more higher paying jobs and different types of jobs, and then 2, also how do we get the housing addressed. Let's get the next question. This goes to density, and this is just, we're throwing it out there. What is the maximum density if you were going to build something? And right now, the city, it's 16 units per acre, isn't it, right now, Maya? Is the maximum. 16 units to the acre. That's the maximum number of units that you'd put in a place. So one of the things we've been talking about, and this is, again, just a snapshot of tonight, 16 units, 20 units, 30, 440, 550. What is the maximum density that you would feel comfortable with?
Can I jump in here?
Absolutely.
Because, you know, unless you're a planner, this is you're
Hard to
trying
visualize.
to visualize what this is. So everyone knows the Citrine Apartments down there on Dry Creek Road paired with Hotel Trio. That project was built at 16 dwelling units per acre. However, they got a density bonus. So their net density on that project was about 22. So you can kind of visualize the 3-4 stories, the massing on about 1 acre site. So hopefully that helps.
It's kind of a philosophy question. Again, we're not going to go too far into tonight, but it's sort of, would you allow more density if it meant you could get more affordability, right? Because more units per acre tend to mean more affordable units. But it's just a question. Okay, survey says. Okay, interesting. All right, so that gives us an idea that people might be willing to chat about that at a later date. We're not going to get into it too far tonight.
Kendall,
yes?
do you want a useless little factoid, may I?
Sure.
The density in Healdsburg is around 3,000 people per square mile. You have just under 4 square miles in your community, and I'm counting 12,000 people. Santa Rosa has 4,000 people per square mile living in the city, and the county of Sonoma has 312 people per square mile. So we're not over, I hear about the overdevelopment of the entire county. 312 is one of the least in California.
Interesting. Okay, this one's not going to work for me. Bad. I'm going to go past that. Hold on here. Are we not working? Let me get over here. I have to do it the old-fashioned way. Every now and then it just decides to be persnickety. You know, okay. Here we go. How do we feel about increasing building heights in the downtown area? Are supportive to it. I'm open to it. I'm going to back up one question. I think I went too far, didn't I? Pardon me. No, there it goes. Open to it, depending on the design. Open to it if it allows affordable housing, or 4, not supportive. So that means in the downtown area, you might see it go up another story in order to accommodate additional units. 1, supportive. 2, open to it. 3, open to it if it allows affordable housing, not supportive.
Is that 40 to 120 or what?
It's just, it's a ballpark. We're not going to get to, okay. So let's see here. All right, so we've got supportive, depending on design, if it allows affordable housing, not supportive. Okay, just a couple more of these and then we're going to get you home, I promise. It's always at the end of the show, right? Come on. Okay, these are quickies about you and then an honest assessment, so please be honest. By honest, I mean really be honest. How long have you lived in Healdsburg? 1, less than a year. 2, 1 to 5 years. 3, 6 to 10 years. 4, 10 to 20 years, or 5, 20 years plus. And it was really exciting to talk to a bunch of folks today that have been here 20, 30 years. That's pretty cool. All right, survey says... Now that's a really good mix. So that shows people that are coming to the community relatively, newer, right? They're participating as well. So raise your hand, the 20 plus years people. Okay, nicely done. All right. This is a tricky question. Are you a male, number 1, male, 2, female? See, I got flustered on it already. There could be a third question, I know. 1 male, 2 female. I know. I've actually have 4 on another one of these for depending on the community. So. Yeah, I think we should all just whatever. Okay. What is your age? What is your age? 1, under 18. 2, 18 to 25. 3, 26 to 35. 4, 36 to 45. 5, 46 to 55. 6, 56 to 65, 7 over 65, everybody's in, nobody lied, nobody's under 18, okay, over 65. What does this tell us about community engagement here in Healdsburg? Okay. All right, this one, we can take it. How'd you like the meeting? 1, loved it. 2, liked it. 3, it was just okay. 4, I did not like it. Or 5, you absolutely hated it. Take your shot. It's all good. Okay. All right. I'm nervous. Joe, are you nervous? Where are you? Okay. All right. Well, we'll see. Okay. Well, somebody hated it. Okay. I'll take that. If you'd like to see us after class and give a suggestion on how we can make it better for your next experience, we are completely open to that because, again, we aim to please. Something other than, that we had that in Yountville, the guy who said he hated it because he didn't like the cookies. And then went and got him his own cookies for the next meeting. I swear to God it actually happened. Okay, here's next steps. Monday night, I know of at least 9 people in this room that will definitely be there Monday night. And that would be our SDAT folks. This is going to be back in this room at 6:30. Then our first public workshop is going to be on the 21st at the Villa Annex. Public workshop number 2 on the 22nd, both at 6:30. And then we'll have the council study session on September 5th. I hope you put in your name and email address. We're going to be producing a summary document of all of the outreach and everything we heard from the focus groups and from these sessions, and that will be released prior to the workshop so you can have a chance to review that material before coming back. So again, thank you all for coming. A hand for our panelists. They thought they were all great, right? Yay. Don't make Keith applaud for himself. Drive safely, have a lovely evening, and do not take my clickers. Leave them there with Joe, or he'll run after you in the parking lot.
And how about a round of applause for our moderator? I thought she did a great, great job.